Good evening, everybody. Are these mics working? All right, yes, they are. Now they are. Good evening, everybody. My name is Zishan Zaidi, and in my capacity of chair of the Harvard Political Union, I will be your moderator tonight. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming to this debate that we put together on this topic, which is of great interest to a number of people. Before I go on with introducing the panel, just to give everybody a sense of historical perspective on this issue, I'm just going to read a very short paragraph from the handbook for students that Harvard publishes on Radcliffe. And it reads, "Education for women began with the help of members of Harvard's Faculty of Arts and Sciences in 1879, and Radcliffe College received its corporate charter in 1894. At its founding, Radcliffe was planned as a separate women's college depending on the Harvard Faculty for Instruction. After 1943 came joint instruction and the gradual amalgamation of the instructional program. From this point, it was only a matter of time until Radcliffe degrees became Harvard degrees, until the graduate school office merged with Harvard, until the same police department served both colleges, and Radcliffe permitted its quadrangle buildings to become part of the Harvard House system. Today, Radcliffe and Harvard students are admitted by a single admissions committee, and Radcliffe delegates to Harvard responsibility for administering the equal access admissions system and all the aspects of undergraduate life, such as housing, athletics, advising, and discipline. Radcliffe continues to speak for women's higher education, both within and outside the university." Well, the purpose of tonight's debate is for different students to express their perception of what Radcliffe's current relation to Harvard is, how they see it, what they think about it, whether it's a good or bad thing, and perhaps what it should be. I'd like to stress that for the audience and for the panelists that this is not an evaluation of RUS as an organization, as some people may believe. We're talking about Radcliffe as an institution. The format of this debate will be as follows. First, we're going to have 3 to 5 minute speeches, perhaps more, from the panelists. Then a 15 to 20 minute period in which panelists can respond to what other panelists say. And finally, we will move on to the question, answer / brief comment period from the audience. Now, the panelists for tonight's debate, seated from your left to your right, are Jesse Furman, president of the Perspective, Deborah Wexler, co-president of the Radcliffe Union of Students, Curtis Gannon, editor of The Salient, and Kelly Bowdrin, council member of the Peninsula. And the speaking order for the speeches for tonight will be Ms. Bowdrin, Mr. Furman, Mr. Gannon, and Ms. Wexler in that order. So without further ado, Ms. Bowdrin.
There is no doubt that because of Radcliffe's close proximity as well as its academic reputation at the time, that the existence of Radcliffe more quickly enabled the transference of Harvard as an all-male institution to Harvard as a coeducational college. That said, however, there is also no doubt which college had more to gain from the agreement. When Harvard went coeducational, that meant women would forevermore have the opportunity of a Harvard education, not the other way around. That is, that men would now get the benefit of a Radcliffe education. Commentators on campus issues of late, however, have decided that leaving out Radcliffe or even mentioning Harvard in front of Radcliffe represents a direct slight, not only to our own history as a women's college, but also to the present population of women. For some, the imagery is all too much. To purposely leave out the once female institution of Radcliffe when mentioning Harvard, the once male institution, is to demonstrate once again the male subsuming the male once again attempting to speak on her behalf. With all due respect to the present administrators of Radcliffe and the many programs and research projects they administer on behalf of women, however, Radcliffe hasn't been a college since the 1977 agreement, when it turned over all responsibility, quote, for the instruction and for the day-to-day management of undergraduate affairs. Arguably, we can date the beginning of its non-existence to when it officially joined with Harvard. After that, all the programs and research projects in the world won't make it a college. To say that we're Harvard students, and just Harvard students, men and women alike, is not only more meaningful because it is indeed the case after this agreement, but it is also less patronizing to women. Extra benefits and programs are fine, but in the end, we as women of this generation in any case, were enabled to come to Harvard because of who we were, not because of Radcliffe, and not because we would have to forevermore qualify our citizenship here as Harvard students with the words, "and Radcliffe too." To keep Radcliffe in the equation is to say that just Harvard isn't quite right, or that as women we're still not full-fledged Harvard students. Sure, let's be thankful that Radcliffe existed, but let's keep the past in the past, and let's let men and women get on with the business of being a community of equals.
Thank you. Mr. Fern.
Okay. Some people might be rather surprised that I'm in some agreement with Kelly. However, to a certain degree I am. I think the key question for us tonight is basically to assess whether or not Radcliffe as an institution, as a separate institution from Harvard, with a sort of quasi-foggy relationship to Harvard, is an advantage or a disadvantage to the women who attend the institution, whether it be called Radcliffe, Harvard Radcliffe, or Harvard. I would like to assert that it actually is a disadvantage. I think that it's a disadvantage because as long as we maintain a distinction, Harvard as an institution is maintaining a distinction between men and women that in other areas and in other aspects and in other rules and situations it has attempted to altogether eradicate. I think as a liberal on campus, I would be somewhat hypocritical to claim on the one hand that Harvard cannot give its endorsement to single-sex organizations like Final Clubs, yet at the same time give its endorsement to an entirely separate institution for women, whether it include women administrators, women scholarships directed entirely or exclusively to women, and women organizations. However, more importantly, I think it's a disadvantage to the women who attend Harvard because, as Kelly pointed out, I think it separates them from having, shall we call, equal citizenship on campus. It maintains a distinction that Harvard attempted to eradicate long ago. And because Radcliffe was originally established back in, I guess, 1879, it has had a sort of somewhat foggy relationship to Harvard, but it was originally established to bring women into the Harvard community and to give them access to the Harvard education. And its founders essentially had as a view of Radcliffe eventually to be incorporated in it, and I think that we should keep that as our goal. President Bunting, who was the president of Radcliffe, I guess back in 1943 when classes were originally incorporated together, once wrote that, let me find this, well, forget what she wrote. Basically, back in 1991, Annie Blaze, who was the Radcliffe orator at commencement, made a speech on what the relationship of Radcliffe is to Harvard. And she essentially asserted that Radcliffe is an important institution that should be maintained because it is an advocate for women on campus. And I see a lot of virtue to that argument, and I think in a certain degree it is correct. However, I also think that it has become an obstacle in some sense to women's full equality. And she spoke or wrote back in 1991, "In my work with Radcliffe Unionist students, it is evident that although Harvard College cared about the concerns of women, they preferred that we talk to Radcliffe. It was also evident that while Radcliffe was deeply concerned as well, it remains difficult for her to accomplish her ends, difficult to guarantee that Harvard hold to its part of the bargain." I essentially see that as the main problem with Radcliffe's existence. As long as it does exist, Harvard is able to point to it as the institution that should be concerned with women. As long as it does exist, Harvard can point to it to say that we do indeed have, prominent women on our administration. As long as it does exist, Harvard does not have to face up to the fact that as an institution it still does have some unequal and unfair institutional practices against women. I think that the only way for Harvard to actually face up to the fact that these unfair practices do still exist is for it to actually welcome women into its institution as equal members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gunn.
Okay. I'm not sure exactly how long we're going to have to go before we get some disagreement here. But I think basically one thing that we can say is that Radcliffe now, and the administrators of Radcliffe basically claim now that Radcliffe is little more than a research institution. If I can quote from the letter that Dean Beauvais wrote in the 1990-1991 Handbook for Students, you're going to get a lot of this tonight, I'm sure. She said that Radcliffe administrators are involved with Harvard in assuring the quality of your experience. Radcliffe's more visible role, that was their behind-the-scenes role, but their more visible role includes the programs and resources that make it more than a conventional college, and that extend and enrich the intellectual, social support, and service opportunities for you. So that is now Radcliffe's claim to existence. They ceased to exist as a college, as Kelly said, and basically Jesse said, a long time ago, since their purpose as a college was only to guarantee a Harvard education to women who couldn't previously actually go to Harvard. To the extent that Radcliffe finished doing that job in the 70s, and by the time quotas in the admissions system were abolished by 1977, Radcliffe's purpose as being an advocate for women at Harvard at that basic educational level pretty much ceased. Nevertheless, I think that, as Jesse concluded, there are some detrimental effects to Radcliffe's claims to represent women on campus, and several of them have already been mentioned, all of which, however, have to be taken in the context that I was just talking about, that Radcliffe's role is relatively trivial in the day-to-day lives of undergraduates now. It doesn't actually do anything to ensure your education if you're a woman on campus. Perhaps it helps you get an internship for next semester, but in the quote that Zishan read at the beginning, it speaks for women in the university, but it ceded all educational control and day-to-day activities in the life of undergraduates a long time ago. Now, that triviality essentially emphasizes the distinction that still exists. It's a very small distinction. It means almost nothing. But the fact that it is so small brings attention to it. It doesn't mean anything in and of itself. This brings to mind the old aphorism that university politics are so bitter because they're so petty. They don't mean anything, and therefore everything gets blown out of proportion. Since Radcliffe doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your daily lives, the implication that they have to remain separate seems to imply much more, as if they're trying to get at something deeper. And this is, therefore, when they claim to intercede on behalf of women with Harvard, when President Wilson is supposed to be Harvard's top advocate for women, to be the go-between between women and Harvard, this is basically patronizing and demeaning. And if anyone were to say that President Rudenstein is the top advocate for male students on the campus, I think people would be offended. What this does to say that women need an intermediary is imply that they aren't capable enough to protect themselves. Very few of us would probably believe that is the case. But to say that they need a special pleader, essentially, somebody that's actually going to take care of all their extra concerns in a way that the male students don't need, we can all see how that has connotations that women just can't play with the big boys or something like that. And that is the sort of thing that Jesse's talking about, I believe, in the perpetuation of some sort of hypocrisy. They're claiming that they want equality, but by maintaining a very trivial distinction, with a separation, it appears to be something along the lines of separate but equal, which is something that a long time ago we stopped believing was equal in many other cases. So to move on, if we think about what Radcliffe actually does now, the funds that it actually gets from women undergraduates, it passes directly on to Harvard. It serves one purpose as it can fundraise from its previous graduates. But those funds, the funds that it gets from the people, the women who actually graduated from Radcliffe before, don't go to further undergraduate education at Harvard unless they're used for special scholarships that women can get, many of which are actually open to men. Therefore, most of the money that Radcliffe is good for in fundraising is Radcliffe's own special programs, those that have made it more than a college, like Dean Beauvais' letter said, but have therefore made it be nothing like a college and be something completely different than a college. I think it would be much more accurate to say that Radcliffe would be more properly called an institute at Harvard, an institute for a women's center or something like that, but it's certainly not a college. And I think as long as they maintain that distinction, it leaves them open to charges of hypocrisy and perpetuates some sort of negative stereotypes, albeit on a small level. So I think that's basically where it stands.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wexler.
Well, I disagree. I just want to start by saying that Radcliffe doesn't need me to describe its relation to Harvard. I'm not speaking as an official representative of Radcliffe. I think it might be easy to assume that because my title has to do with Radcliffe, but it's really, I'm speaking as a student involved with Radcliffe College. I cannot answer for every detail of Radcliffe life, but I can provide an overview of why Radcliffe should exist and what it does. The relation between Radcliffe and Harvard is a vital one. Although Radcliffe is integrally connected to Harvard, it maintains its financial and spiritual independence. It sponsors programs for graduates and undergraduates that are open to women and men, concentrating on its three major goals: to educate and inspire women for full participation in all areas of life, to strengthen Radcliffe's role as a major center for research on and by women, and to engage women in shaping public policy on important societal issues. More specifically, Radcliffe offers the Schlesinger Library, the Lyman Common Room, grants and fellowships, supports for women's sports, Radcliffe seminars, career services, externships, the list goes on. Its programs, administration, and resources are indispensable to the women and men who take advantage of them every day. In addition, though, Harvard relies on Radcliffe. Harvard doesn't have a women's center, as do other colleges, because it has Radcliffe. The Office for the Arts at Harvard and Radcliffe, dance programs, and Education for Action are based at Radcliffe. Would these and other programs exist if Radcliffe weren't there to sponsor them? Perhaps. Could they be administered by Harvard? Of course. But would they receive as much backing and priority as they do now? I don't think that would be the case at all. Radcliffe is free to back important specialized programs that are the first to go when other budgetary constraints arise. Harvard's reliance on Radcliffe, however, is important but not crucial. Radcliffe is a flourishing institution that has the wherewithal and resources to run its own show. It has an active and committed group of alumni. But Radcliffe's appeal is not limited to its alums. Many women who choose to come to Harvard-Radcliffe cite Radcliffe itself as a major component of their choice and value the women's institutional history that existed here prior to the introduction of coeducation. Current students, in turn, benefit from their interactions with alums through mentoring programs and informal contact with Radcliffe, either participating in programs, receiving grants, or working in various departments. I missed the whole step. But what I want to say is that 500 undergraduates were directly involved with Radcliffe. And I want to point this out because I think people have a tendency to just assume that undergraduates are sort of blown past in Radcliffe, and it's not the case at all. These 500 undergraduates were actively involved in Radcliffe's programs, and this doesn't include the people who just, use the Schlesinger or come to other, use other resources. But I think what's really another really important part here is that we shouldn't underestimate Radcliffe's symbolic importance. In many ways, Radcliffe is a historical anomaly, but it's here to stay. If we were recreating Harvard and Radcliffe today, we wouldn't create two separate institutions for the reasons that Jesse referred to and others. As it stands, however, Radcliffe's vibrant present and bright future is founded on a distinguished and important past, a 100-year history of innovation at the forefront of the women's movement. Because of this, Radcliffe is not a policy open to debate, nor is it a hot campus issue. Radcliffe and Harvard have together defined their relationship. Radcliffe's goals do overlap with Harvard's, yet they remain distinct and directly connected to Radcliffe's historical role as a leader in women's education and advocacy.
Thank you very much. All right, now we've basically heard the positions of our panelists. We're going to move on to the second part of this panel discussion, which is the discussion / debate within the panel. For the next however many minutes we choose to carry this on, panelists are free to ask other panelists questions, respond to points they made. And to give this period a bit of structure, we're going to start off with Ms. Wexler asking questions, making comments, and we'll take it from there.
As you can imagine, there's a lot I want to respond to, and I'm going to try not to hit every point, because I think you'll just, I think I'll lose what I'm trying to say. But to this point that Radcliffe is not a college, it's an institution, I have to say that a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. It's a semantic debate. What it does is important. And whether you call it Radcliffe Institution or Radcliffe College, it's the role that it's fulfilling now is an important one. Second to this, patronizing was a big word that came up in all three speakers, and I think it's presumptuous to assume, this is sort of getting sort of underneath what you're saying, it's presumptuous to assume that the presence of Radcliffe means that Harvard won't hire women deans. It's presumptuous to assume that the presence of Radcliffe means that women need advocates. I mean, the Radcliffe exists because it's historically existed, and it's continuing to fulfill a role that is an important one, because I do think inequities continue to exist in society and in its institutions, and that's what Radcliffe is doing. And it's patronizing, it's extremely patronizing to assume, and also contrary to fact, that Harvard won't support women and sponsor women because it has Radcliffe, because it relies on Radcliffe to do that. Also, just to say what Annie Blaise said a couple years ago, I don't think Harvard, I mean, in my dealings with Harvard and Radcliffe, I've dealt with both extensively, and I don't think I've ever felt shunted off to Radcliffe. It's just personal experience. I think a lot of other women will say the same. I'll leave it at that now and then respond to what others have to say.
Does anyone want to respond to what she said?
Oh, sure, I'll take up. I just find it sort of ironic that Ms. Wexler defends her position by saying that women aren't treated in a patronizing manner by the existence of Radcliffe, by saying, one, that Harvard doesn't get out of its role of helping women, but then in her own speech she gave us an example of Harvard relying on Radcliffe as saying that, of course, Harvard could do this, but that it probably wouldn't give it the same priority, that it probably wouldn't put forth the same amount of funds and that Radcliffe is presently doing or give it the same amount of attention. And I think that gets at the crux of the issue, that there is this contradiction here, and that Harvard should be treating us the same way that it should treat men's students or male students. And that perhaps this would mean that we shouldn't have a women's center, or maybe that we should have a student center instead. These are all like many issues that we should be confronting, but that we haven't had to confront because Harvard has pushed off all of these issues on Radcliffe, and Radcliffe is only too happy to accept them to keep its day-to-day activities going.
Oh, do I get to respond to that now?
If you want to.
I mean, there is a contradiction that I do think the problems that the programs that Radcliffe supports are not only women's programs. They're programs that Harvard won't support because it does have its own priorities, and its priorities are not women. I don't think it's patronizing to say that in society, but I just don't think it's patronizing to say that it isn't something that won't receive emphasis, and that it's something that Radcliffe sees as important as emphasizing and then would continue to. I think the women students who also don't see it as important as receiving interest don't need it, but then those who do, at Harvard College, at Harvard graduate schools, just in society at large, can then go to Radcliffe if they want it and if they need it. And I think Radcliffe needs to remain in order to fulfill that function. Not for the undergraduates only, but for everyone else as well.
How many men go to Lyman Common Room and use those type of
I don't know, but
facilities?
I've seen many there, many programs.
I mean, if you had to compare them between like how many women use it and how many men use it, would you say that it's about equal, or?
I mean, I don't think that's really the issue. I don't think the issue is, to take Deborah's defense to a certain degree, I don't think the issue is how many men or how many women do it. I mean, perhaps you are in disagreement, but I don't think what the Lyman Common Room represents or what it does is something that shouldn't necessarily exist at our institution. I think it's a very valuable resource. I think it's a very valuable place at Harvard, as is the Schlesinger Library, as is the Office of the Arts, so on and so forth. I mean, what I would say, however, is that those things can exist within Harvard without and here I disagree with Deborah, without necessarily separating them off into a separate institution. So I don't think it's a question that men are uninterested in women's issues. I think it's also a question of, to a certain degree, by saying how many men go to the Lyman Common Room is essentially saying that Radcliffe is only a women's issue, or women's issues are only for women, because I don't think they should be or necessarily are.
My point is that insofar as Harvard pushes off these responsibilities onto Radcliffe, that men are going to tend not to use them. They're going to see this as, oh, that's sponsored by Radcliffe, that means that's for women. Sure, I can use it too, but the tendency happens to be that it's done by Radcliffe, it will be used by Radcliffe. And because Harvard is pushing off this responsibility, it's not addressing the issue within the community, it's not addressing the issue so that men and women within the community have to deal with it, but rather those Radcliffe students who happen to get this book, for instance. I don't think any males in the room got this at the beginning of the year. I know that Lyman Common Room exists, and I know all the programs that exist, but I bet you that most of the men here don't know as many, because as non-Radcliffe students, they don't get this. And the idea is that when it's pushed off on Radcliffe, that only Radcliffe will use it.
Wait, for those members of the audience who don't know, does anyone want to explicitly state what the Lyman Common Room is?
The Lyman Common Room is sort of an informal drop-in center that has a lot of different kinds of information on women's resources. It sponsors a lot of programs of its own that are not just from groups associated with Radcliffe, but groups throughout the university. And it also has WISH, which is the Women's Information Services Hotline, a good database on a lot of things, resources in the Boston area that's used by people outside of the Harvard Radcliffe community as well. I think you can check that with the Radcliffe Guide.
I would like to bring up a point. You were responding to my insinuation that Radcliffe is more properly called an institution at Harvard, or an institute, a research institute at Harvard than a college. Ms. Wexler said it's a semantic debate arose by any other name would smell as sweet. You can call it an institution, you can call it a college, it doesn't change what it does. Yet this doesn't change the fact that there is some patronizing activity going on, and this was the point you were taking offense to, when Dean Beauvais writes that behind the scenes, Radcliffe administrators are involved with Harvard in assuring the quality of your experience by being a special pleader, by interceding with the university, by making decisions about policies that will affect women, implying that you need this extra sort of help. And although Radcliffe claims to be more than a conventional college, it doesn't seem to be willing to give up this behind-the-scenes role of advocating and acting on the behalf of undergraduate women. Do you think this changes your response to if there's anything demeaning about that sort of policy?
I actually don't think it's demeaning, because I think that, while it may be true that I think Harvard can confront the issues with Radcliffe's help or without Radcliffe's help, probably more with Radcliffe's help than without it, I think there are still issues to resolve, and I think that Radcliffe's presence behind the scenes helps resolve those issues. And I actually don't find it patronizing.
It's not a question of if Harvard can confront them, but can women negotiate their own problems with Harvard? Or do they have to have somebody else to do it for them?
Of course they can negotiate their own problems with Harvard. The reason Radcliffe exists, and we all know the reason Radcliffe exists, is that it's existed for 100 years, and it isn't going to disappear. It has too much going for it to disappear. It's not a question of, gee, women couldn't deal without Radcliffe. Of course they could, but it exists, and was part of the agreement, and that's sort of the way it's worked out administratively. And I think that's basically how I see it. And it is more of a historical anomaly in that sense. But I don't think that anyone at Harvard, sort of ignores concerns because of it. I just don't think that's the way it is. And I don't think people see it as a patronizing thing. I think that they see it as a result of historical situation.
For one thing, to respond to Curtis on 2 points. First of all, Radcliffe isn't gender neutral. Radcliffe, in your argument at least, is composed of women. So to a certain extent, it is women arguing on behalf of women. But that's besides the point. I do think that Radcliffe exists as a historical entity, and as such, I wouldn't advocate its immediate abolition, tomorrow, so to speak, because I do think that it has, a lot to hold. A, as a historical entity. B, is something that many alums or alumni no doubt do identify with closely as having graduated from here. But I think as that institutional memory fades, it's something that the institution should, I guess, fade along with it. However, not the memories, and I think those memories can be preserved within a larger, Harvard framework.
Well, yes, that's fine, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't call it what it is. You say that it exists for an historical reason and it shouldn't be abolished tomorrow. No, but perhaps it should be called what it is tomorrow. And the other thing is, when you say these are women advocating for women, that doesn't change the issue that they're assuming the students can't advocate for themselves. Women students.
Well, quite frankly, Curtis, first of all, many issues that you would say are similar to your own views. Harvey Mansfield, for instance, advocates on your behalf most often, to point to someone in faculty. So right there, can't you say what he says?
So you're assuming this is an ideological question?
No, it's not a question of ideological. It's a question of what issues and concerns are addressed on people's behalf, and you're saying that students can't speak on their own behalf. It's not a question of students not speaking on their behalf, but if someone speaks in addition to them, it doesn't preclude them speaking, at all. But not to mention the fact, to address your other point, I don't think it's a question of calling it what it is tomorrow, because the fact is the people who graduated from Radcliffe College before 1971, when it was Radcliffe College, identify with Radcliffe College as the college to which they went and from which they graduated. And as long as those people are still around and you know, exist, I think that the university or the college has a responsibility to them to exist for them.
To exist as what? It is no longer what it was when they were here. When they
Fine,
give them
Harvard is no longer what it was when the people who went here in 1969, you know, were here either. For that matter, it has women.
I mean, the two have changed fundamentally. I mean, you can't even draw an adequate comparison. I mean, Harvard got women, certainly, but Radcliffe lost the control of educating its women, the control of the women's housing, the control of the administration of the women in terms of discipline. I mean, the two institutions, I mean, there's no difference. Harvard enhanced, Radcliffe collapsed.
We'll have time for audience questions and comments later.
Radcliffe gained actually what it's always wanted, which is education for women that's equal to education of men.
That's
what
right,
it's been working
and
for all
therefore
along.
it
By
accomplished
becoming
its
a Harvard institution.
You're
Go
saying?
ahead.
By becoming a member of Harvard, essentially.
You know,
It's also somewhat ridiculous to take my sort of slow abolition point, to say that people don't still identify with Radcliffe when it does yearly bring in $2.5 million worth of donations, because that clearly means that, you know, people, whether it be one person giving $2.5 million or many giving $1,000 up to that amount, you know, that means that people do identify with Radcliffe, and as long as that's the case, I see no problem with it existing as it, you
Okay,
know,
so when they
as
die off, as you pointed out,
Absolutely.
they will eventually. Then do we come clean and say what's actually happening here, that this is Harvard?
I don't think it's a question
I
of
mean, are you saying that we're only Harvard and Radcliffe so that we can keep up the fundraising?
Yeah, partially, absolutely. I think that's a valuable reason, but it's not a question of fundraising. It's also a question of a duty to the alums who graduated from Radcliffe to maintain the institution in as much as it's different from when they were here, but nonetheless to maintain an institution from which they graduated and to which they can identify. I mean, I think many of the women who graduate from college today don't necessarily identify themselves as Radcliffe students, and I think that, you know, that's because they are now, you know, institutionally, for the most part, a part of Harvard College. And, you know, but it's the women who graduated before they were institutionally a part of a Harvard College who I'm talking about. And yeah, when they die off, then we can consider this issue again.
I don't want to talk about this sort of die-off thing, but but I do want to say that I don't think Radcliffe lost anything in 1971. I think they gained a lot, as they stood to gain a lot because they were the smaller institution, but they also gave Harvard an enormous gift. And I think that they shouldn't be rewarded for this enormous gift by being totally discounted as an institution, which is sort of, I think, what you're suggesting happened. So.
I'm not sure anybody's saying they're totally discounted as an institution. It's just merely that their institutional role has changed. Now that they have accomplished the integration of education at Harvard, they serve as a, you know, whatever the picture book phrases are, a research institute and a information gathering center for women's issues, and they coordinate all the women's studies programs in Massachusetts.
Actually, that's not
or whatever.
true, but whatever. Go ahead.
What,
They don't coordinate all the women's studies programs.
Linda Wilson.
It's just not true. I mean, there's a women's
Okay.
studies department. It's part of Harvard. But go ahead.
I'm not talking about the Harvard Women's Studies Department. It's the panel that Linda Wilson sits on that coordinates the women's studies programs. It does all these different things, which now they claim to make it more than a college, and they basically do none of the collegiate things anymore. I think that's the claim that at least I'm trying to make. I'm not sure about Kelly.
All right, well, part of this portion of the debate is once things come to a lull, we move on to the next speaker in reverse order. Do you have anything in the earlier speeches that you want to respond to?
I guess I would like to respond to one thing that Curtis said and one thing that Deborah said. Curtis, perhaps he might explain himself in response, but mentioned in his opening speech sort of a triviality. He attributed a triviality to Radcliffe, and that I would dispute, despite the fact that I think ultimately it would be good for the two to merge completely. I do think that Radcliffe serves some very important purposes at Harvard that shouldn't necessarily disappear, and that it is important to realize, recognize, and proclaim. And in the event that any day in the future Radcliffe does become an institutional part of Harvard, I think that it's important that those be maintained. And to respond to what Deborah said, she said something to the effect that she thought it was presumptuous to assert that Harvard does not have any female administrators, so on and so forth, because Radcliffe exists. And call me presumptuous, but I think that that's one of the main reasons it does, because I think if someone were to say, why don't you have any women in the administration, and I'm not that aware of the Harvard administration to say whether there are no women, but I certainly know that, among the prominent administrators at Harvard, there are no women. I think Harvard does and can point to its Radcliffe administration and say that's not true. We have 5, very important women over there in very important positions in the university. And the fact is that they do play a secondary role in the university. And I do question whether Harvard will ever get a female president until it can no longer point to its president at Radcliffe and say we have a female president already.
I just want to talk about Dean Nathans, Dean McKay Smith, and other deans who, I can't list the Harvard administration either, but I think that historical history takes time to change, and whether that's a question of this, this die-off thing, or a question of getting women into Harvard administration. I think it's a real thing that these deans have been around for a long time, and they are men. But I think that when they die off, it's not. I don't think that we should automatically assume that the people who replace them won't be women, and I just don't think that'll happen. I do want to address the question of ideology. I think it's really hard to look at the panel, especially the way it's set up, and look at sort of members of the press of the campus right, members of the press of, the campus left, and me. And I'm not necessarily allied with left, although I think it may be assumed that because I'm here as a feminist. And I think people would assume that's left, that's pretty radical, that's, But to me, feminism is really about equality, and the fact that would be, equality to me is just not a radical left-wing concept. And I think that what's sort of ending up here when you say ideology, and maybe I shouldn't have introduced this, but I think it's inevitable that what we're coming right down to here is sort of discussing Radcliffe from these ideological points of view, and I just don't think it deserves that. I think there are many shades of gray on this issue, and I think that's the way it needs to be examined.
I just want to say that I made you guys sit this way because I thought it would be aesthetically pleasing. I didn't think that there is no ideology in play.
I think that says a lot about our moderator. To respond to the last point about feminism being about equality, I doubt that especially conservatives would disagree with that. I don't think that Kelly would disagree with that. She might call herself a feminist. I know that 2 previous female editors of The Salient called themselves feminists. They were actually quite concerned about the fact that Radcliffe seemed to try to represent them and ideologically always seemed to get it wrong. And when I brought up ideology, I can't exactly remember when I did, but something you mentioned about the E4A. I believe you said E4A wouldn't get the support from Harvard that it does from Radcliffe if Radcliffe weren't around. And I can read the description of E4A, Education for Action, in the Handbook for Students, and it says, a multicultural student-run organization whose members explore race, gender, and other socioeconomic and political issues and develop creative methods for positive social change. This does not strike me as a definition that is startlingly lacking in ideological biases. That's the sort of thing where I think Radcliffe frequently comes back to be associated with ideologies, even if women and the equality of women ought not to be. So I think that we agree to a great extent on that.
Right. Do you have any questions or comments you want to make, or are you?
Maybe I should just come clean. I'm not a feminist.
That being established, do you have anything left to bring up, or are you guys ready to move
No,
on to
that's
the
all
others?
right.
All right.
Unless Jesse wants me to clarify my trivialities.
No, that's okay.
Okay, we're going to open this up to the audience now. We have one microphone on either side. What we have during this period are questions and or comments. So feel free to either ask a question to the panel as a whole or to any particular panel member, or to voice your opinion on this issue in the hope, or maybe without intending to provoke a response from the panel.
We need more people on this side.
That's your right, Jesse.
Before we start, I'd just like to ask every person asking a question or making a comment to introduce his or herself before speaking, and any affiliations that might be pertinent.
Hi, my name is Emer Dwyer. I'm a sophomore in Adams House and a proud member of Radcliffe Union of Students. I'd just like to say that addressing the comment that Radcliffe is not a college, like I think Mr. Gannon said that, that students of Radcliffe don't have, I can't remember how he eloquently phrased it, but that they don't have opportunities as a college, like there aren't collegiate activities for them. Being a member of Radcliffe Rugby, Radcliffe Union of Students, my roommate Radcliffe Crew, and myself also Radcliffe Spring Break Externship, there are 3 huge activities that I regularly participate in, so I would say they're very much collegiate activities, just to dispute his point there. Further, I'd like to address the question either to Ms. Baldwin or Mr. Gannon, I don't understand why you're saying that that being a part of Radcliffe detracts from our equality as students. And I don't understand, Ms. Baldwin perhaps particularly, why you consider yourself not equal if you're a part of Radcliffe, as compared to Mr. Gannon.
Sure. Well, just to respond to your activity, your list of activities as well, I feel that because of those activities, we shouldn't elevate the institution that administers them to college level, simply because those activities enable women to participate more fully in perhaps the internship programs that we couldn't get from OCS because we have to compete with men, or because, that women need all these extra benefits, and because of these benefits, Radcliffe is elevated to this collegiate status that's equal with Harvard. I feel that as a woman, I should be able to do this through Harvard as well, and that because I can compete with men, that I don't need extra help, so to speak, as Chris pointed out. Curtis, sorry, getting him back for calling me a feminist.
You want to add anything to that response? Or?
Are you done?
Yeah, basically.
Well, I think a couple of things. I can't add much more to the inequality of Radcliffe, except to remind you that my point was essentially that maintaining the distinction implies the old phrase of separate but equal, which we don't tend to think of as equal anymore. And that gets back to my question of triviality with Jesse. But on the first point, I can think of institutions that provide summer jobs and allow you to play rugby or row boats, and they could be called a day camp. These don't make for a college. And the only reason that a college, I think, is an institution that's involved in education. Those are extracurricular activities. I wouldn't say that because Harvard has the Harvard Salient, an extracurricular activity, that is what makes it a college. That was the distinction I made between college as an educational institution and these peripheral things that tend to be associated with colleges, like research institutes or libraries or extracurricular sports or publications or what have you. But they're still not educating in the classroom. About equality?
You made earlier that being a member of Harvard and Radcliffe somehow detracted from equality with Harvard.
I didn't say much about that because Jesse and Kelly both talked about it, but the question is that at one time Radcliffe was assumed, that the Radcliffe name could have been assumed to be something that meant you weren't a real Harvard student. When you were taking courses at Radcliffe in 1940, it meant that, as one person has described it, that the Harvard professors came and gave the Cliff Notes version of their lectures to the females, therefore it wasn't considered as the same as a Harvard education. Now that Radcliffe, which has always existed, as the statement was, to get women a Harvard education, to stick that extra name on there implies that it isn't exactly a Harvard education, which can imply inequality. I'm not saying it necessarily is unequal, but it leaves you open to charges of inequality because it's an extra sort of stigma.
And to add to that, I mean, I remember when I was accepted to Harvard, my acceptance letter said Radcliffe. I remember people going, does this mean you're in Harvard? Or, I mean, and we only become, I mean, literally full-fledged members of Harvard when we graduate from Harvard Radcliffe. I mean, it's because we have to stick that extra clause in there, and Radcliffe, that I feel like, why can't we just say Harvard? Well, because it's not accurate. Because it's not accurate according to the
Thank you.
distinction between the two.
Ma'am.
Hi, my name is Amy Sandler. I work here at the Kennedy School. I'm also class of 1990, Harvard Radcliffe. I serve on numerous committees for Radcliffe, but I should preface that by saying that until my senior year, I had no conception of what Radcliffe was. I was never affiliated with the Radcliffe Union of Students. It wasn't until I went to the Schlesinger Library and was warmly greeted there that I chose to get involved with Radcliffe and learned more about it. I would certainly agree that Radcliffe has, whether it's a public relations problem, a marketing problem, that there's a definition, what is Radcliffe, what does it mean for an undergraduate? I can speak that for alumni, it's invaluable in the sense of building a community, in the sense of instilling an old girls network, whether it's careers, whether it's combining work with family, different issues that confront women. I'd like to compliment Ms. Bodrin on your Radcliffe Red, which I think subliminally perhaps you are a feminist inside. And I think that you'll find, just as the term feminist has taken on a dirty term, so has the term what Radcliffe is, that it's either perceived as something radical or something that it's not. I think Ms. Wexler described the 3 missions, which are to promote the advancement of equality for women in society, research, as well as the new public policy initiative. If promoting advancement of women towards equality is an ideological statement, then maybe that makes me a feminist, but then I would be proud to be such. I guess my point is that I think that Radcliffe has a lot to offer, both for the undergraduates and for the alumni. I agree that for the undergraduates, not as many people understand all the programs. You have to make an effort. Radcliffe also has to make an effort in terms of explaining what the different programs are, whether it's with the Bunting Institute, whether it's research fellowships, whether it's the mentor program. But those programs exist, and they also want to work on issues like the chilly climate in the classroom, increasing women's participation, increasing female faculty members. I don't think that Harvard shunts things off to Radcliffe. I think it's the reverse. I think that Radcliffe keeps the pressure on Harvard so that Harvard will understand that women do have a voice. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need a Radcliffe. It is a historical institution, but we're not in the ideal world where we have all the deans are women and all the presidents are women. And I think that, and I'm not saying that that's the ideal either, but I think that until there's inequality in the classroom and the administration, that Radcliffe certainly has a voice, and I'm happy to be affiliated with it.
Thank you very much.
I have a comment for Mr. Gannon and Miss Bowdrin. When you seem to be saying that everything achieved by Harvard and Radcliffe before they joined together should entirely be credited to Harvard, and I think that's very presumptuous and very condescending. And I also think that when you seem to be saying that Radcliffe's only purpose in being formed was to eventually foist its students off onto Harvard, that's also very condescending. Do you have any comment?
If you leave foist out of it, I think it's about accurate. Not, you can consider it condescending, but that's also what Radcliffe administrators to this day still say, which is one of the reasons why Radcliffe existed, which was to enable Radcliffe women to get a Harvard education. They come together. I mean, a Harvard education called Radcliffe wouldn't be right.
But it's both a Harvard education and a Radcliffe education.
Only because they tack it on.
And say that all your education comes from the classroom is also kind of simplistic.
But I think then you have to address what Curtis is saying, is that if these extras make something a college, then I mean, what is the difference? I mean, because Harvard doesn't exist because there's Peninsula, though I have different reasons, or because there's a salient, or because there's a perspective. I mean, it exists because of its education.
All right, we're going to limit the follow-ups. Thanks. Well, could you just briefly?
Your second point, I'm not sure Kelly answered, but she just said that if you leave out force upon. I wouldn't say that that's the only purpose of Radcliffe at all. That's why I say Radcliffe might more properly be called a research institute at Harvard. There's certainly many other things Radcliffe does. They have post-baccalaureate programs, libraries, these sorts of things. Those just aren't necessarily involved with undergraduate education directly,
Right.
especially a post-baccalaureate program.
Thanks.
Well, yeah, actually, though, I have to say, I mean, doesn't Harvard itself draw students by saying that, you know, oh, you've got the graduate schools, oh, you've got this? I think Radcliffe does.
That's not Harvard College, that's Harvard University.
No, but I mean, I think people who are applying to Harvard College may choose Harvard over a small liberal arts college because it's got these research institutions. And I think it's equally fair to assume that women or men who are interested in women's issues would choose it because of these Radcliffe programs for postbac.
But that's also to imply that women would only come to Harvard because there's this extra crutch that will enable them to get through a Harvard education
No,
to
it's not at all to
eventually
imply that.
to
It's just to say that
graduate.
it's there if people want it.
Or that they need
And it's
it.
an-
And that's
an
what we're
additional drug.
debating here, is whether or not women need these things and need to continue using them.
Hi, my name is Deanna Williams. I'm a junior in Northhouse in the Radcliffe Quad. I sing in the Radcliffe Pitches. I work in the Lyman Common Room. I serve on the Radcliffe College Alumni Association Undergraduate Relations Committee. My voice lessons were funded by a grant from the Office for the Arts, and it goes on and on. But I do think that Radcliffe has a really problematic role, and I was really interested to hear everything people had to say tonight. To your one question about attendance in the Lyman Common Room, we get about 40% men, I would say, 40, 45. It's a drop-in center, and whoever happens to be around comes in. People come in for different programs that the university has, and we have like a lot of information about women's issues gets shuttled off to the room, so we like put it up on the boards and sort of serve as a resource center. People can call the number and ask, oh, well, I want to volunteer at a battered women's shelter, what do you suggest, or something like that. Internships relating to women's issues, things like that. Research partnerships at the Bunting Institute. We have all the Radcliffe information there. The one thing that your one point about the Radcliffe Guide, I think, is really well taken. I think one of the Radcliffe's biggest problems is that if, indeed, the Radcliffe Guide isn't sent to men, I think that's problematic because I think men have as much to gain from Radcliffe as women. Maybe not totally as much, but I think as a center for advocacy of women's roles at the university and stuff, men should be taking as much of a role, and maybe what needs to be done is to have men get also the Harvard Radcliffe symbol, perhaps. Also, the Undergraduate Relations Committee last week met, and we are dealing with the issue of the fact that it really isn't an equal institution in that we only have 43% women or so here, which is an issue. Why is that? And it may be a Radcliffe issue on both sides. There are women who are attracted to Harvard Radcliffe because there's this presence of this vestigial, perhaps, women's institution that does do a lot of advocacy, and people may be detracted from it because they're like, well, what is that? I want to be a full-fledged, co-ed institution thing. So maybe that needs further clarification.
Thanks. Well,
I didn't really have a
okay, there wasn't. We're going to move on because we're going to try to get through everyone.
Hi, my name is Pearl Chan. I'm a freshman. I have a few things I just wanted to toss out. First, the Radcliffe Convocation. This year was the second year that after the Radcliffe Convocation was resurrected, and the invitations were issued to both male and female first-year students. And there was a fair male turnout, although it obviously could get better. But, as far as all of these things go, a lot of them boil down to perhaps a public relations matter, but I just think it's very strange to question the validity of Radcliffe. I also work for the Radcliffe College Phonathon, and this fall alone, in a period of 8 weeks, we raised almost $300,000 just from calling alumni, and these were not the big donors. But we raised almost $300,000 just from calling, and I talked to alumni from classes beginning with the 30s all the way through to the 90s, and across the board, in every decade, there were lots of women who said that Radcliffe was an integral part of their college experience and that it was very important to them. It was not something, that was much better for them in the 40s as compared to the 80s or whatever. Across the board, women were saying Radcliffe is important. It's important to them. It is an integral part of their education. And it's just like, it's strange to talk about abolishing Radcliffe because to many, many people, it's a very important part of their college experience. You know, I think if you're going to debate anything, perhaps you should debate what exactly Radcliffe's role should be in terms of like redefining specifically its purpose. You know, I happen to believe very strongly that Radcliffe should have a defined role in undergraduate education, day-to-day education. But, you know, that's something on the side. I just find it strange to hear that Radcliffe should be abolished, that's all.
Ma'am.
My name is Deborah Schneider. I'm an administrator here at the Kennedy School, and I also graduated from the college in the 60s. I'm one of the people who hasn't died off yet.
I wish you a long and healthy life.
Thank you, thank you. And I have a question, a genuine question. It's one I don't know my own answer to yet. Here at the Kennedy School, as probably all of you know, there are public policy fellows, a number of whom are women. And does anybody share my concern that when Radcliffe starts a public policy program that will have a less well-known name attached to it, less prestige, I'm guessing, because it's Radcliffe, less money, although I don't know, that this will be widely perceived as a second tier for women? I have very mixed feelings about Radcliffe taking these initiatives because of what I sense is that danger. If you can't hack it at Harvard, well, there's always Radcliffe. I'd like to hear your responses.
I mean, I think you have in a nutshell that one program is exactly what's happening with every other program that Radcliffe is already offering in addition to the programs that Harvard is offering. I mean, we saw today, tonight when we talked about the deans, whether or not what we see is Radcliffe, you know, Garden Street as where the women hang out, and where women will do their thing, and where women can get the extra help they need. I mean, something that's been bothering me is I was thinking that, let's say that Harvard was a white institution. I mean, some could argue that it was, male, female, and that what it joined with was a black college or an Asian college, if ever such a thing. Would we be keeping up the distinction? Would we be saying whatever that black college was and Harvard, this white one, and having this black college still exist so that it could have all these extra programs to help this other group that just joined Harvard? I mean, would we need these extra benefits? I mean, does anyone see that this would be a patronizing thing, and that to have these extra things, this crutch, these extra programs, is just saying that women can't hack it here at Harvard, that we need something else?
Thanks.
Could I respond to it? I'm not going to respond to what Kelly said, but to say that I just don't have a, Radcliffe for me is not a pejorative term. I don't see it as a second-tier institution, and so I don't know that would necessarily be the issue. I think that probably would provide more opportunities for a lot of people to be doing a lot of really good things. That's my view of it.
Yes, I'm Tom Woods. I'm on the Council of Peninsula, so just for a little ideological change for a minute. And I assure you that this question is relevant. Just let me get to the end of it. My position on the final clubs is, first of all, I'm not a member of a final club. I don't think I'd ever be punched or anything. I don't think I'd want to be a member of a final club. It's just not really sort of my scene, I guess. But, you know, but still, I think that freedom of association is a good thing, and I don't fancy myself a petty tyrant going around forcing people to change their clubs. So that said, one of the criticisms of the final clubs seems to be that, you know, they're elitist, they're sexist, and the thing is that within these clubs, if you're a member of one of these clubs, you get a lot of contacts, you know, it helps you out later in life. And one of the criticisms is, well, if women don't have access to this, that's a bad thing. They're being denied opportunities. It's almost as if women, you know, have a right to these opportunities. Well, in that case, my human rights are being violated, but I don't think that's true. But the bottom line is, do you think that, now I don't know for sure, I'm kind of sure about what Ms. Weckler's view is on the final clubs, but I wonder, do you think that there is some kind of a contradiction there? On the one hand, we've got to smash the final clubs, make sure women are allowed in there, but on the other hand, it's perfectly fine for them to have a very large institution with all kinds of programs that only, that a lot of scholarship assistants and all the rest of it that are only open to women. Do you see that there is anything at all contradictory whatsoever in that?
Well, first, let me say that I'm not a tyrant either. At no point have I told, I mean, I've said what I've thought on the issue just as you said what you thought on the issue, but I have at no point, tried to force anyone to do anything just as I don't think you would. And I'd just like to get the implication that I'm a tyrant sort of,
Oh, I didn't direct that at you. I just like
I
the
think
phrase.
it was, though.
That must have been me.
What?
I said that must have been me.
Right. Men do have access to Radcliffe. They have access to all but a few prizes. They have access to the alumni networks. There's a man, in fact, who, I was just at an alumni sort of thing, and this was an alumni thing, because there was a man who'd graduated from one of the Radcliffe graduate programs and had petitioned to become a member. And they said, sure, come on in. And he came to this luncheon with all of the Radcliffe alumni from, who were, from the class of, I don't know what, 40. And it was really pretty interesting to see how it worked, but it worked. And the fact of the matter is it is open to them. And in that sense, it's fundamentally different from a final club. It's not small and exclusive. It really does broadcast its programs, and it really does welcome everyone. I think that's just a major difference.
Thank you. Ms. Drake.
Hi, my name is Michelle Drake. I'm a first year here at Harvard and a member of the Harvard Political Union. So I'd like to thank you all for coming and making this such an aesthetically pleasing panel. I think that Radcliffe does serve a valuable purpose, at least from what I know of it in my short time here, but I also think that it was great when Harvard went co-ed in the 70s, and I'm curious about the parts of Radcliffe that haven't decided to go co-ed, and Zishan said that he didn't want this to be a forum on the Radcliffe Union of Students, but that seems to be one of my major stumbling blocks when I think about Radcliffe. I think that the goal of equality is certainly a noble one, and one that all of us are bound to endorse, but I don't really understand the purpose of having a union which claims to speak for women on campus that doesn't include men, because I think that one thing that we've seen here tonight is that there are a lot of men who are interested in women's issues, and I'm curious why it is that they're artificially excluded from participating in a forum that tries to speak about women's issues and issues that are important to women.
Okay, there are a couple of things there I want to talk about. I think RUS has been trying less and less to speak for women on campus. I think it's been trying to present the view as representative as it can be, but I think it's not trying to assume a sort of monolithic, this is what women on campus think. The issue of men is an interesting one, and it's one that we've grappled with throughout the year. And it's when men have come, we've welcomed them, we've wanted to talk to them, and we've debated and considered opening it to men. As it stands right now, $5 from every woman goes to support the Radcliffe Union of Students. And I think if we were to change that and make it supported by men and women, we could sort of maybe consider allowing men in. I think it's something that Radcliffe's own policy would have to sort of think about too. But it's definitely been an issue for us. We've been thinking a lot about that, and we have welcomed them. And there's one more thing I want to say, which is this. One of the ways that Radcliffe most affects people, though, is by awarding grants and also by programs it puts on. Those are open to women, and grants have been received, are open to men and women. Grants have been received by men. Men have petitioned for grants and won them. And that's sort of, clearly it's definitely not that way, but it is a way of including them and, sort of opening it up.
Okay,
so I hope that answers your question. If you have any follow-ups.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think we've heard a little bit about Radcliffe needing to define a mission. And I think that a valuable mission for Radcliffe would be to try to open up the things that aren't open to men right now. I know that the externships program isn't open to men and the mentors, and I think that one thing that Radcliffe could do and that would be a valuable mission would be to open up the last places that aren't open to men to them. Thanks.
Could I just respond to the RUS point?
Here it is. Okay.
Well, what would we have if RUS opened up their membership to men? We'd have an undergraduate council again, but an undergraduate council devoted to women's issues, meaning that undergraduate council can't adequately help and support women's issues, and that women, if they're going to be adequately supported at all, need another undergraduate council. Clearly, I'm hoping that we're starting to see how this duplicity in activities, the duplicity for the sake of women who just simply can't compete with the men, seems ridiculous and is patronizing.
I think it's if I can speak, I think it's absolutely ridiculous to call it duplicity. To assert that there aren't women's issues in society today is being blind to reality. The fact is women at this university have very many issues that we as men, or I as a man, don't have. For instance, concerns about safety, concerns about rape, concerns about, many things that I don't have to deal with. And for instance, Lighthouse, the very fact that it's open to men doesn't make it Perspective or doesn't make it another publication on campus. It's open to men and women, and it does have a very noble and prominent role on campus to speak about and to women's issues. And to open up RUS to men isn't to say that it would become an organization without a purpose or a meaning. I mean,
No, but the point, to artificially keep RUS going for the sake of addressing women's issues is to imply that the undergraduate council will not adequately support them, that they won't, that when all their different grants come before them, they're not going to be helping women's issues in particular. That we need a whole nother undergraduate council just to be devoted to women's issues.
I just would like to say that the RUS, thankfully, does not try to be the UC. It never has been, it never will be. It's an organization that does live sort of a double life, because in some ways it is the student government of Radcliffe College, but in some ways it is a women's group. And I think this leads to conflicts, but I also think it leads to a lot of synergistic combinations and makes it better than a women's group and better than a student government. And it combines in ways to address things that Jesse's right. And I don't think the UC would address a lot of the issues, and partially that's because I'm not sure the UC
addresses any issues.
Get around to addressing a lot of things it wants to address. And I think I think that someone in the audience made an important point that we don't live in this ideal world yet, and we really don't. The UC certainly is not an ideal organization. I mean, you can level any charges against any other organization on campus, and that's certainly not my point. But I think that we are fulfilling a role that just isn't filled by them right now.
Right, and that is the point of this debate, is that RUS, Radcliffe, all its activities exist because Harvard is not fulfilling its role, and Harvard's organizations aren't fulfilling its role.
Just in this specific case, like abolishing RUS would not.
I think we could go down the list of RUS activities and Radcliffe activities and say that it exists in addition to.
I mean, the fact is we have a BGLSA, a Bisexual, Gay, Lesbian Students Association, to voice and to act as an advocate on behalf of bisexuals, gays, and lesbians. And the fact is that serves a very noble purpose on campus also. And if Harvard doesn't
right, but we don't make BGLSA
there's a
and
place
its representatives
in society.
college.
There's a place in society, and there's a place at Harvard for advocacy groups. The fact that Harvard doesn't pay enough attention to these groups and to these people is the reason that these groups exist. And I mean, I agree that it should be open to men, but nonetheless, I don't think that means that it should be abolished altogether.
All right. The powers that be are signaling to me that we're going to have 2 more questions. I'm sorry to the other 4 people standing up, but sorry, John.
My name's Claudia Mastriani. I'm a senior in Dunster House. I'm in Radcliffe Choral Society and in the a cappella group within that, which is the Cliff Notes. And from that perspective, I see the traditions that go into Radcliffe. The alums of RCS are very enthusiastic, and I don't quite understand the need that I think I hear from Mr. Gannon. It sounds like you would prefer it that all the undergraduate things like Radcliffe Choral Society became Harvard programs, and Radcliffe, if it existed, were totally apart from that and were only existed in things like the Bunting Institute. And colleges aren't just a place for education. Colleges are tradition. They're 4 years of people's lives. There's a great deal of sentiment vested in them. And for that reason alone, even though there are other stronger reasons, I don't see the need to violently separate those things that are linked.
I think the distinction is that the Radcliffe Choral Society isn't the institution of Radcliffe. And that's really all I'm saying, is that all these extracurricular activities could be equally associated with Harvard. They wouldn't have to go co-ed any more than any of the all-male singing groups would. But
RCS has a personality that is linked with Radcliffe College. We sing, nobody else knows them, but we sing Radcliffe school songs. I mean, it's, to call it something with Harvard in the name would change the personality of the group.
You can keep calling it.
There are many, I mean, this is just the one example that I'm most familiar with, but there are many, I mean, Radcliffe is not a bunch of separate programs. It's a whole. It's
a whole of those separate programs.
And I think the administration that oversees this gestalt, if you will, is essentially not a college. It can have all its traditions and everything, but it can be another separate part of Harvard University that doesn't just have to go by the name of Radcliffe College. I mean,
About Radcliffe Gestalt.
Hey, thank you. And for our last question, Ms. Levine.
Okay, I'm Hallie Levine. I am a junior. I am currently co-coordinator of Lighthouse Magazine, and I've also been involved with Radcliffe Union students in some of their events. I have a question for Kelly Bodrum. And my question is that, through this, we heard the debate, we've heard your point of view, and Curtis Gannon's point of view, that Radcliffe doesn't have a collegiate focus. It is an institution. And my question for you, as a woman, is whether you feel that some of Radcliffe's programs, if Radcliffe itself, let's just say tomorrow, next year, 10 years, 50 years, was abolished, would you still support some of the programs? Would you support, for example, Schlesinger Library, which is the largest collection of oral history of women in America, which has won numerous awards? Would that have validity in campus? Would you support the mentorship program? Would you support the externship program? Would you support the Bunting Institute, which gives grants to women scholars to pursue their research? And the reason why I ask that is that I'm curious is, would you support these programs for women that are not necessarily political, but in a context of giving them, either mentoring them, giving them women to follow as role models, or even Schlesinger Library, which is just a collection of women's history, and says women's history, you have pride in it, or do you think that that should be abolished from Radcliffe altogether, from the Harvard campus altogether?
Insofar as Radcliffe activities are done without an ideological bias, I'm all for them. But I don't think that their existence makes for a college, such as the Center for International Affairs doesn't make for setting up Harvard, Radcliffe, and the Center for International Affairs colleges. They're institutes or research centers within the College of Harvard. Insofar as Radcliffe activities are ideological, I don't think they should exist. I think they misrepresent women. I think my position on some of these things are known. Looking at the Radcliffe Guide, for example, I see Students for Choice in here. I don't see Alliance for Life. I understand that Radcliffe and RUS tries to go out of its way to include others of a different point of view, but my feeling is that when you have this ideological setup, which I don't think you can get out of by saying that Radcliffe needs to exist in addition to Harvard, that you're going to attract all types of women. I think you're going to be biased and restricted in that area.
Then if ideological organizations shouldn't exist, should Harvard?
Yeah, that's what I think. I think everyone has an ideology, period. And I think the ideology of Radcliffe, which you're using, sort of throwing this word around as if it's a negative term, when really it's something that everyone has. Any thinking person has an ideology. And Radcliffe's thinking ideology.
Right, but within Harvard, we have many ideologies. And what I'm saying and positing is within Radcliffe, to a certain extent, I did break it up, that there are some activities that are non-ideological, but there are some that are solely in one direction ideological. I call this, risky, but I'm saying that I don't think there are many, I think there's a reason why Alliance for Life isn't in the Radcliffe Guide, and why it's only Students for Choice. Because I think that for instance, when you define feminism, I think the woman's right to choose is one of those things. I think people just consider that automatically.
Right. And the forum's ideology is that events shouldn't go on for too long. And we're going to call it a night right here. Thank you very much for coming, all of you. And please join me in thanking the panelists. Thanks. You guys are free to keep your placards if you want. You guys can keep your placards.